In the dark reality of 41st millennium, the Imperium needs to utilize every tool at its disposal against the overwhelming odds, even if it means recruiting Xenos or mutants. This might look controversial to many subjects of the Imperial propaganda portraying Xenos and mutants as the enemies of humanity, but overly strict discipline does not leave room for such questions to be voiced. In addition, some Xenos are such a frightening force on the battlefield that when it comes to action, soldiers are just happy they're on the same side. The Ogryn, Homo sapiens gigantus, are a huge and physically powerful abhuman mutant subspecies of humanity, often employed by the Imperium of Man as shock troopers in the Astra Militarum's Militarum Auxilia. Ogryns possess many traits prized by the Imperium. They are brutally strong and completely loyal, although extremely limited intellectually, which restricts their battlefield role to simple and direct assaults. They hail from a series of cold and barren planets across the galaxy that possess high gravity, such as Anarch Zeta, which is why they appear larger, heavier and bulkier compared to baseline humans. Ogryns compensate for their mental deficiencies with overwhelming physicality. The brutish creatures stand around 10 Terran feet, 3 meters tall, and can shrug off wounds that would kill an Imperial guardsman several times over. These qualities mean that Ogryns make exceptional shock troops and are often deployed on the front lines of battle by Imperial commanders. It is fair to say that Ogryns do have their limitations. Their equipment must be simple and exceptionally rugged, as anything within arm's reach is likely to see brief and violent service as an improvised club. Their heavily built Ripper guns must also be fitted with burst limiters to stop the Ogryns from firing ceaselessly. 30 solar seconds of noisy enjoyment can easily leave these abhumans short of ammunition before a battle has even begun. Ogryns are easily confused, meaning they work best when given simple, straightforward missions, and their lack of personal hygiene borders on the criminal offense. However, once indoctrinated into the Imperial creed, they are doggedly loyal, and their strength and resilience make them a potent weapon. The Ogryns are the toughest and largest soldiers commonly used by the regiments of the Astra Militarum. Originating from cold, barren, high-gravity prison planets settled many millennia before the founding of the Imperium of Man, the Ogryns' distant ancestors were once normal, baseline humans during the age of technology. Thousands of standard years in the harsh terrains and brutal living conditions of their prison worlds after the start of the Age of Strife caused the fall of the first interstellar civilization of mankind, forced their ancestors' bodies to adapt to their hostile environment by growing in size and strength, though at the cost of intellectual development. The adaptation to a high-gravity planetary environment is the reason for the Ogryns' thick skin, powerfully muscular build and resulting monstrous size, as they stand between 2.5 to 3 meters tall. Though their adaptations led them to increase in physical size and strength, the Ogryns' intelligence declined to below-average human levels. As the planetary conditions, barren environments, cold climates, little food and long periods of starvation that caused their mutation required only primitive survival instincts, part of their adaptation involved the loss of the ability for more complex intellectual thought, since philosophical matters were unnecessary in an environment marked by starvation and a constant fight for life. Ogryns are said to be even less intelligent than some orcs. However, the truth is that their intellect did not actually atrophy, but became much more focused on matters such as survival. The genes that enable psychic abilities are unknown among Ogryn as a result. Ogryns are claustrophobic, which means that they can only be loaded into armored carrier vehicles with great difficulty to be transported to the battlefield, and can only ride in vehicles if a commanding officer is present. As many as half a squad may be mounted on a chimera. This slightly slows their deployment speed. An Ogryn's speech patterns in Low Gothic have been noted to be much the same as those observed in orcs. The Tithes Chamber Notaries Subplanetary Census, abhuman, is a subdivision of the Adeptus Administratum that oversees the classification and recognition of stable abhuman strains within the Imperium. Of these, 46 types are now listed as extinct, and no records have been received of a further 12 strains for over a generation, suggesting that they too have died out or been assimilated back into the general population of mankind. The status of the remaining 15 abhuman races is quite varied, and there is permanent disagreement about their specific classification amongst the adepts of the Tithes chamber notaries. The most noteworthy and contentious matter concerning the adepts is the Ogryn matrix of abhuman strains. This complex group is currently officially listed as 7 distinct types: Alpha, Theta, Type 4, Type Via, HS Gigantus and the mysterious grey Ogryns. But many in the chamber doubt that these are all separate subspecies of humanity, and yet another official revision of the classification is therefore pending in a few solar decades. When the Ogryns were rediscovered on their homeworlds by the Imperium during the Great Crusade, the Imperial army saw their military potential and began recruiting the Ogryns as close combat soldiers. The recruitment process was relatively easy by Imperial standards, as Ogryns hardly needed any training. Most Ogryns are quite capable of bringing down almost any enemy, and their natural combat skills make them good assault troops. The officers of the Imperial army, and after the Horus heresy reshaped the Imperium, those of the Astra Militarum, also found that Ogryns were extremely loyal once introduced to the imperial state religion of faith in the Emperor of Mankind, the Imperial cult. They are known to believe and do anything their leaders say and ask and see the orders they receive as having come down the chain of command from the beloved God Emperor himself. On the other hand, Ogryns are known for their inability to understand complex commands and tactics. This simple-mindedness has also contributed to the Big Abhuman's reputation as being notoriously easy to corrupt to the service of chaos, particularly by the temptations of the blood god Khorne. Many Ogryns, for example, fought in the Vraxian traitor militia during the infamous Siege of Vrax. Their skin is extremely thick, and Ogryns can ignore wounds that would cripple or kill a normal man. As they are brutal and direct, they favour knuckle dusters and knives for close combat. Ogryns in Imperial service are issued with special, large auto shotguns known as Ripper guns for ranged combat and clubbing at melee. The use of frag grenades is also popular among Ogryns. Although believed to possess extremely low intelligence, some Ogryn may have a slightly higher level of intellect than others. This boosts their chances to be chosen as candidates for the biochemical Ogryn neural enhancement procedure, also known as BONE, which raises their intelligence further. These relatively smart Ogryn are given the title Boneheads, and as they are able to understand more complex orders, they are placed in command of a squad of normal, unaugmented Ogryns. Ogryns officially serve in the Militarum Auxilia, the specialist division of the Astra Militarum that contains most of the abhuman units employed by the Imperium, including Ogryn and Rattlings. So I asks myself, what would Colonel Stracker do? Easy, I says. He'd probably yell at me for bloody standing about and not smashing things with me mates. So that's what I did. They even gave me this air-shiny medal when I was through. Specialist Nift, Bonehead First Class, speaking candidly about his promotion among the dim-witted Ogryn species, there exist certain rare individuals who, despite their primitive mindset, exhibit a rare glimmer of intelligence, problem-solving capabilities, memory or natural drive. Such individuals quickly stand out among their brethren, making them ideal candidates for biochemical Ogryn neural enhancement. Recipients of such procedures generally refer to themselves as Boneheads, and possess enhanced cognitive capabilities well beyond those of an unaltered specimen. Many are able to remember their own names, count some of their fingers, or even make tactical decisions beyond hitting things, capabilities that quickly mark them as eligible for positions of limited authority. Boneheads are often the brains of their units, and other Ogryns look to them for leadership both on and off the battlefield. To other Ogryns, the fact that a Bonehead even holds his rank is often reason enough to obey, and most are content to trust that anyone who remembers as much as a Bonehead probably knows best anyway. As such, a Bonehead's unit often has few disciplinary problems and a clearly established hierarchy, assuming everyone remembers what they are supposed to be doing at any given time. Boneheads are brutal but effective leaders, bellowing orders over the din of combat and punctuating their shouts with vicious blows from their oversized weapons. Where the average Ogryn is clumsy and ungainly, boneheads are much more coordinated than their primitive brethren, and able to wield weapons with surprising dexterity, though their inherent clumsiness can never be completely eradicated. Despite their abilities, they are not particularly well equipped compared to other Astra Militarum units, often fighting with the same weaponry as their unaugmented brethren. The main difference between a bonehead and his squad mates is the cerebral implants and modifications to their thick skulls. Despite their crude and sturdy appearance, these implants are actually quite sophisticated and capable of withstanding a fairly substantial amount of punishment, particularly useful when such a device is borne by an Ogryn. In combat, the procedures enacted upon a bonehead's brain are put to the ultimate test, as they confront numerous decisions and obstacles of command head-on. However, their determination and inhuman stubbornness often see them through such situations, while their unique physiology more than compensates for any lapses in discretion or judgment. As a result, an experienced bonehead is often capable of leading his fellow abhumans more or less where he is told with a little practice. Despite their intelligence, boneheads naturally exhibit many qualities that define a good leader. They tend to be driven individuals, stubborn to a fault and unwilling to back down or admit defeat in even the most hopeless situations. Such dedication is often born of absolute faith in their superiors, whom boneheads trust implicitly and without reservation. They are also not afraid to lead from the front, providing an example to their fellow Ogryn and encouraging them with simple, intuitive commands, accompanied by bursts of fire from their ranged weapons. It is debatable whether this is learned behavior or simple necessity, however, as the stupidity of many Ogryn recruits may render all but the simplest orders incomprehensible. However, despite their training and modifications, no amount of cerebral tinkering can completely eliminate the bonehead's base instincts, and even the most intelligent individuals suffer from bouts of savagery. Some boneheads are even equipped with cerebral implants to magnify or enhance these tendencies, turning them into engines of destruction once certain criteria are met or trigger phrases uttered via their vox links. Regardless, a bonehead's rages are truly terrifying to behold. An Ogryn's primitive nature is the direct result of the harsh environment in which they develop, the cold, feral worlds of ice and death that the Ogryn subspecies calls home, providing little incentive for mental development. As such, an Ogryn embodies the most primitive aspects of humanity, though greatly enhanced and exaggerated due to their severe retrogression. Yet despite their dim-wittedness, they possess an underlying savagery and hardy physique that makes them incredibly useful on the battlefields of the 41st millennium. The Imperium of Man often recruits these massive creatures as shock troops, arming them with crude and simple weapons before pointing them at the enemy and unleashing them on their foes. Ogryn are well suited to such tactics, their underdeveloped brains rarely registering pain and injury as they smash into the enemy's lines. Though equipped with powerful ripper guns, every Ogryn is highly capable in close combat, their primitive brutality and massive physiques allowing them to crush their foes with a savagery few adversaries can match. Yet, despite this universal proficiency, there are individuals to whom the allure of smashing their enemies to a pulp and breaking their bones with blows from their massive fists is particularly appealing. These are the Ogryns, who are always near the front of their unit, eagerly wading into combat with whatever weapon happens to be at hand. Some simply enjoy crushing enemy skulls to powder or tearing off limbs with their bare hands, while others may rely on their volatile temperament, flying off into a killing rage at the mere mention of their hated enemy. Some are so stupid they cannot truly comprehend the nature of their situation, delighting in what they consider an enjoyable game as they revel in the shouts of encouragement and support from their comrades. However, many simply resort to close combat because they can, their primitive brains falling back on their natural instincts in the heat of battle. These sorts of Ogryns are always found at the forefront of battle, eagerly overwhelming their opponents with devastating blows from their massive fists and oversized weapons. Many tend to have little understanding of ranged warfare, either having forgone much of the training required to further their combat abilities or simply being too dense to comprehend such tactics. This makes them generally savage even by Ogryns standards, while their size and feral aspect serves only to magnify their combat effectiveness. As with all Ogryns, the line between placid stupidity and mindless rage is a fine one, and easily crossed in the rush of combat. The death of a companion, the harsh words of a commander, wounds inflicted by an enemy, any of these may be enough to drive such an Ogryn into paroxysms of rage at the mere sight of a foe. However, the rage of such a savage individual is a thing to behold as their primitive minds aggressively lash out at the source of their ire. This propensity towards violence often serves to make their legendarily short tempers even shorter, while an Ogryn bulwark at the height of his anger is a rampaging whirlwind of destruction that dashes his foes to pieces with the sheer force of his blows. In combat, a bulwark is the embodiment of primitive savagery and rage, fighting without thought of restraint or self-preservation. They instinctively attack every enemy within range, swinging their weapons with such bone-crunching force that armor buckles and bodies shatter in their wake. So intent are they on crushing their foes, they are immune to pain, injury and fear, blindly charging through whatever obstacle stands between them and their enemy. The sight of a bulwark on the battlefield often provides tremendous encouragement and inspiration to his comrades, as he smashes through all who stand before him. Some Astra Militarum regiments view their Ogryns as a sort of champion, sending them forward whenever a particularly vicious adversary appears, and looking to them when all seems lost and the unit is on the verge of being overwhelmed. Time and again, as the bulwark's mighty blows split his adversaries apart, and his massive physique ignores all but the most grievous of injuries, his comrades take strength from his steadfast example and push on into the bloody conflict. At other times, the bulwark may instead serve as the rock upon which the unit is grounded, an unbreakable foundation for his comrades to cling to, and an endearing example of faith and devotion. See this dent here? That was made by an orc skull. By the Emperor, I'd swear some of them are as thick as a chimera's tread guard, but that didn't stop Krund from splitting its head open like a new Grok's egg. No, sir. And see that warping there by the shell extractor? Apparently that's what happens when you fire 5,000 continuous rounds without a recharge. Guardsman Lysa, explaining the poor state of an Ogryn specialist firearm to the regimental quartermaster. Ogryn's ranged weapon proficiency may vary greatly from individual to individual, often coming down to the Ogryn's individual dexterity and whether he is able to remember how to operate the firearm in combat. Regardless, Ogryns are markedly uncoordinated as a rule, and any attempts at accuracy often produce results that are mixed at best. Even the most skilled Ogryn marksman rarely approaches the exacting degree of precision expected of the average Imperial Guardsman. However, there are many Ogryn who derive substantial enjoyment from the mere act of firing their weapon regardless of accuracy, instead reveling in the raw, destructive power in their hands as they thoughtlessly expend countless rounds of ammunition downrange. Such Ogryns usually are truly colossal creatures, whose bulging muscles and gigantic stature allow them to manipulate their oversized weapons as effortlessly as a normal man might wield a laser gun, while relying on their immense bulk to compensate for any recoil. Many are even large enough to fire their weapons on the move, acting like a sort of mobile fire support platform for their fellow soldiers, while eagerly charging into the fray. Once they begin firing, gunluggers rarely stop until they either run out of either ammunition or opponents. Though the weapons they wield in combat often vary, the childlike glee these individuals exhibit for their battlefield roles is unmistakable. They are often seen sweeping their great weapons back and forth in wide arcs during a battle, grinning stupidly as they pulverize their targets with concentrated streams of high-caliber fire. Most tend to lag slightly behind the other members of their unit, stopping whenever a shot presents itself and only continuing to advance at the bidding of a superior officer, or when they no longer have anything at which to shoot. They are usually eager to come to grips with their foes, habitually disregarding enemy fire or any considerations of personal safety in order to discharge their weapons at their targets. In addition, The expenditure of all their ammunition or the occasional weapon jam is a frequent cause of wildly destructive tantrums among these trigger-happy brutes. And many choose to vent their savage rage by charging headlong into the enemy's ranks and bashing their adversaries to bits with the offending weapon. Other members of these units often rely on the relentless fire of a gun lugger, advancing forward while their large comrade empties round after round at every enemy in sight. Gun luggers are also particularly useful among squads of other Ogryn, or similarly equipped assault units, providing crucial fire support until their more hands-on companions can close the distance on their foe. Even those armed with ripper guns tend to wield them to greater effect than other Ogryn, and often the newest and most reliable models within an Ogryn squad are reserved for their use. Due to their constant exposure to enemy fire, some gun luggers hold reputations for outstanding bravery and stalwart determination among the units they fight beside, serving as mobile rallying points and potent examples of bravery to any faltering allies. They are generally battered in appearance, their thick hides scarred and pitted from countless impacts that would have severely incapacitated an average soldier. Yet, their remarkably resilient physiology often allows them to shrug off such blows without difficulty, ignoring small arms fire and shrapnel as a man might ignore the buzzing of corpse flies. Many gun luggers carry other items to add to their destructive capabilities in addition to their firearms, including grenades, anti-tank bombs, incendiary devices, and other simple explosives which they may hurl at enemy positions. These weapons are often quite effective in the hands of a gun lugger, assuming he knows how to properly arm the device or remembers to use it in the frenzy of battle. Some compensate for such errors by hurling multiple charges at once or expending their bandoliers as rapidly as possible, laughing with delight as huge swathes of the battlefield erupt in fire and death. Though rarely landing where the Ogryn intends, the volatile payloads of such weapons frequently remedy any concerns regarding the Ogryn's accuracy. Strange life, not part of the Astra Miliata, not part of the Imperial Guard no more, not after thing went bad on Comlar. Funny, really. Ogryns kept fighting long after the little ones ran away. Held that hill for 3 days. Little men in spiky armor charged us again and again. We broke them and threw them onto the rocks. 3 days we held alone, but there were no medals, no food, only big angry words. Recollections of an Ogryn skullbreaker now serving as a bodyguard. An oath-bound bodyguard is an Ogryn who has sworn to defend the life of a high-ranking Imperial servant. Ogryns make excellent bodyguards, for they are loyal, determined, and extremely hard to kill. In this role they have but one duty, to protect the Astra Militarum officer or other Imperial dignitary to whom they are assigned. Whether they achieve this by throwing themselves in the line of fire, or by slaughtering all enemies who come near to their charge, they are invaluable retainers in the swirl of combat. Among the officer personnel of Astra Militarum regimental commands, it is considered a great honor to have an oath-bound Ogryn bodyguard. Normally, Ogryns are such a valuable asset that they are formed into squads and used as shock troops or blocking detachments. But sometimes a high-ranking officer manages to requisition one for their own personal retinue. In the same way that officers sometimes have advisors from other arms of an Imperial crusade or other Imperial force, an Ogryn can end up shadowing a captain, colonel, or general as they take a journey to the front to inspect the war. Imperial officers also take great pleasure in the intimidation factor that an Ogryn brings to any tactical briefing or even social engagement. The towering abhumans making everyone in the room painfully aware of their own insignificance. Rarer still are those instances where an Ogryn will form a bond of fellowship with a low-ranking officer or even regular guardsman. The simple minds of these hulking abhumans can for reasons unknown become fixated upon a particular human, especially if that human shows them kindness or just happens to be in the right place at the right time. Once an Ogryn connects with an Imperial soldier in this way, the bond becomes almost unbreakable. Reports from various war zones confirm that this has happened on several occasions, with charismatic and courageous junior officers acquiring for themselves the undying loyalty of one of the abhuman shock troopers. "Not sure how I got here, never am. Don't much care long as I know who to crump," That's what Ogryns are for. Fight for the Emperor, die for Emperor. Good life long as you're strong, and there's no one stronger than me. Shame about my boss. Tried to save him. Couldn't, didn't. Won't let it happen again. Inquisitors say we gotta protect this world, so that's what I'm gonna do. Make Emperor proud. Keep me mates alive. Gonna be a good time. An Ogryn Bulgryn. Bulgryns are clad in custom-made carapace armor made from discarded tank tracks and carry crude melee assault weaponry intended to capitalize on the Abhuman's stature and sheer resilience. While some wield power mauls and buckler-like brute shields, the simple but effective slab shields are their trademark, locking together to form a mobile defense line. So deployed, these Bulgryn units provide their comrades with a wall of walking cover as they advance across the battlefield, soaking up vast volumes of enemy fire in the process. The Ogryns take their protective duties very seriously and will often form a line at the slightest sound of gunfire, which can be most inconvenient in crowded trenches. Yet Imperial Guardsmen, advancing behind a Bulgryn squad, swiftly forget such mishaps as shots whine harmlessly from the Ogryns' shields, leaving those soldiers crouched in their lee unharmed. Needless to say, casualties are high among the Abhumans themselves, but the close-range bombardments of the Ogryns' grenadier gauntlets exact brutal revenge soon enough. The foes are left reeling and shell-shocked even before the maul-wielding Ogryns charge into their midst and bludgeon the survivors into a red paste. Ogryn Karanites were specialist detachments of the Imperial Army during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy eras that were assigned to the elite Solar Auxilia cohorts when brute strength was required. As their name indicated, Charonite squads were only constituted of the physically powerful Abhumans known as Ogryns. Unlike the more common Ogryn Bulwark or Gunripper squads, the Charonite squads were a far more specialized detachment that could, in some regards, be considered as the predecessors of the present-day Astra Militarum Bulgryns, although they also shared a lot in common with the infamous Chaos Ogryn Berserkers, which are thought to be a bastardized version of the original Charonite template. If you want to win, you send for the biggest, meanest and angriest you've got. That's me. Not these runts. They can't hold a proper gun, can't hold a proper knife, scream in pain all the time, or just because it's fun, or because they're bored. Idiots. Anonymous Ogryn Skullbreaker. An Ogryn Skullbreaker is an Ogryn soldier who leans into the Ogryn's foremost attribute, their prodigious strength. He loves nothing more than to charge into the thick of the fighting, shouldering aside any punies that get in his path to deliver punishing, shattering blows against his chosen target, often while laughing as the tiny foes tire themselves out, flailing at him in return. It's not subtle, but it's definitely effective. More importantly, it's fun. Ogryns like having fun. Ogryn Skullbreakers enjoy melee and ranged combat equally and are often armed with improvised clubs, power mauls, massive cleavers, slab shields and the like for close-in work. For ranged assaults, the standard Ripper gun is the most favoured, though some Ogryns prefer a twin-linked heavy stubber. Chaos. Ogryns are simplistic Abhumans that dwell on worlds far from the Emperor's light and often fall into the worship of the ruinous powers. The servants of Chaos also sometimes forcibly conscript Ogryns into their ranks. Known as Ogryn brutes, the servants of the Dark Gods will utilize crude surgical procedures, forbidden combat drugs and sorcerous rituals in order to control the beasts and set them upon their enemies. Through the use of further modification and forbidden methods, Chaos Renegades have also created two distinct variations of Ogryn brutes, the Ogryn Berserkers and the Plague Ogryns. Ogryn Berserkers are heavily surgically altered using prescribed neurological and biochemical processes. This crude adaptation starts by lobotomizing the Ogryn, turning it into an imbecilic, docile creature, unable to even feed itself and becoming utterly enslaved to its masters, until the chemical injectors installed directly into its upper back are activated. The injectors deliver a cocktail of potent, highly dangerous drugs, including the banned combat drug called Slort, into the Ogryn's bloodstream and muscles. Slort, once favoured by the notorious Flesh Tearers Space Marine chapter, and the World Eater's Traitor Legion stimulates the subject's adrenaline glands and the neural pathways to the areas of the brain that govern aggression. With these driven into overdrive, the user becomes a raging psychopath, driven by bloodlust that cannot be sated. Other drugs are also injected, including various phencyclidines that give the user massively increased strength and an almost superhuman ability to block pain, with side effects such as induced hallucinations and a desire for self-mutilation. Strong beta-adrenoreceptor blocking drugs augment this, allowing the Ogryn to fight on with terrible wounds that would usually kill it outright. The downside of this drug-fueled rampage is that the body's system is not likely to be able to cope with the drugs for long, and vital internal organs will quickly start to fail. Ogryn berserkers were used as expendable troops during the siege of Vrax by the Vraxian traitor militia, and were not supposed to survive their first encounter with the enemy. They were a one-use weapon hurled into the enemy in furious counterattacks, with the single aim of inflicting as much damage as possible before collapsing or being slain. Plague Ogryns are hideously distorted creatures, hulking masses of bloated, diseased flesh and twisted mutations. The effects of Nurgle's gifts on the already massively strong and hardy Ogryn frame are particularly foul, and they prove ideal breeding grounds for nightmarish plagues of all kinds. In battle, these creatures can prove almost impossible to kill, and their merest touch brings a horrific death. The first plague Ogryns are believed to have been created by the mysterious heretic Astartes warband, known as the Tainted on Vrax Prime, during the infamous Siege of Vrax. A faction devoted to Nurgle in its aspect as a mortifier of flesh, they are said to have worked the darkest of their sorcerous arts on the already distorted and chem-augmented Ogryn slave stock being used by the rebel forces on Vrax Prime. Since that war, Ordo Malleus savants believe the secrets of creating plague Ogryns have been refined further by the Tainted deep within the Eye of Terror, and they now trade these vile beasts among the servants of the Lord of Decay in return for fresh subjects on which to practice their twisted craft. There are special Ogryn detachments and regiments. The 51st Abhuman Penal Suppression Detachment is made up of those Ogryns deemed unfit for frontline duty, either due to permanent injury or exceptionally limited intellect, even for Ogryns. The administration within the Spinwood Front has put these damaged Ogryns to work aboard the prison barge, Oath of Judgment, as wardens. The vessel routinely travels around the sector taking on military prisoners, guardsmen who have failed to adhere to the strict regulations of their regiment or committed some minor crime that was undeserving of summary execution. The upper decks of the vessel remain sealed at all times, and the Ogryns patrol the lower decks with the prisoners, told to keep anyone smaller than themselves from causing trouble. So far this practice has worked, with the prisoners for the most part intimidated by the Abhumans and the Ogryns too stupid to fall for any of their tricks. On occasion, the suppression detachment is also used in a policing role on Imperial Navy vessels or Imperial Guard bases, where their heavy-handed tactics can be used to quell riots and round up criminals. 81st Anarch Zeta Regiment Immovables. The Bulgryns of the Anarch Zeta 81st Regiment have gained a reputation for holding their position no matter how much punishment they take. This strength is also their greatest weakness, as in lieu of new orders they will remain rooted to the spot, even if an outflanking force has rounded their shield wall. The Immovables are therefore often teamed with squads of rattling snipers. The diminutive sharpshooters lie in wait behind their giant Abhuman cousins, out of sight of the foe. As the enemy approaches the immovable wall, the rattlings open fire from their protected positions before quickly redeploying as the tides of battle shift. 1636th Iron Arm Bulwark Squad. The Imperial Guard regiments of Cadia constitute a large proportion of those forces fighting in the Spinwood Front. Many of these shock troop formations arrive with their own Abhuman detachments in tow, having served alongside them in other sectors. The 1636th Iron Arm Bulwark Squad has fought with the Cadian 818th shock troops for at least a decade, the lumbering Ogryns of the squad forming fast bonds with the guardsmen. In battle, the Iron Arm Bulwark Squad is used for holding actions and shock assaults. their mighty slab shields and mauls smashing into enemy formations or holding them at bay. In the battle for Bridge 212, the iron arms proved their worth time and again as they held back the rampaging orc forces of Warhammer. 3 times the Goth warbands tried to cross the bridge, and 3 times the Ogryns threw them back, the towering abhumans cracking green skulls in a brutally efficient fashion. The Krork Ogryn Auxilia are an Ogryn Abhuman Imperial Guard regiment that hail from the high-gravity steppe world of Krork. These particularly brutal Ogryns have developed a warlike culture which has provided frontline troops for the armies of the Armageddon sector for centuries. The use of Ogryns from the Krork Auxilia is always heavily controlled, for they are a brutal race that can prove to be just as dangerous to their allies as to any enemy of the Imperium. They are sent to Imperial Guard regiments in single squads, and between battles the Ogryns are often kept heavily sedated, which does little to improve their already volatile temperament when they are finally unleashed in combat. In battle, the Krork Ogryns become an almost unstoppable force. Whilst they have little patience or aptitude for the use of the relatively complex Ripper gun, the damage they can cause with their own primitive close combat weapons is without measure. In numbers, a mob can tear apart lightly armoured vehicles and even bring down small buildings with little effort. Often the greatest problem in their use is rounding them all up after the battle has ended, before their delight in sheer violence causes serious collateral damage. The Monglor Ogryn Auxilia are an Ogryn Abhuman Imperial Guard regiment that hail from the troubled world of Monglor, which recently has become a great source of consternation as a large percentage of the Ogryn population has traitorously rebelled against the Imperium and even now fights fiercely against the Angels of Redemption. Space Marine chapter hastily redirected onto the planet. The one regiment remaining loyal to the cause has been consigned to the battle for the hive city of Hellsreach on Armageddon, where questions of loyalty become secondary in the face of overwhelming invasion. The Abhumans seem to be devoted to the Emperor's cause and have exhibited great valour and force of arms. However, they will remain under full surveillance indefinitely. There is little other information on this obscure Abhuman regiment in official Imperial records. The Orcan Stonecrushers are an Ogryn Abhuman Imperial Guard regiment that hails from the high-gravity world of Orcus, located in the Calixis sector. Following their discovery by the Imperium in the wake of the Angevin Crusade, the Ogryn population was welcomed into the Imperium and wholeheartedly embraced the Imperial Creed. Recently, several Ogryn regiments have been raised in the aftermath of the Imperium's retaking of Orcus from the traitorous Severan Dominate forces during the massive campaign being fought in the Spinwood Front. Some Ogryns even made a name for themselves. Nork Dedog became a legend in his own lifetime, an Ogryn whose fighting abilities as an Astra Militarum soldier are almost as astonishing as mental development that can only be called precocious for one of his subspecies. Due to his unusual mental acuity, he quickly came to the attention of the commissars of the Imperial Guard, and Nork soon found himself placed on special duties. Nork's reputation for loyalty is unsurpassed, and his skills as a bodyguard have been in high demand by Imperial officers across the galaxy. Urok has served among the ranks of the 233rd Catachan Jungle Fighters for many years. Having been tithed at a very young age, he has become incredibly attached to the little UNs he serves alongside, especially an old Catachan by the name of Gurion. Unfortunately, in the recent assault on the teeming, Gurion was shot and killed by a group of Orc boys. Urok was inconsolable for days, and has now become hungry for revenge against the Orcs. Ogryn are stubborn and dim-witted, usually only speaking in broken Low Gothic, and Urok is no exception. He is slow to react but fiercely loyal, always coming to the aid of his comrades, and always willing to follow the orders of his commissar. However, the recent loss of the little Gurion has caused Urok to act uncharacteristically aggressive. He has started acting on his own initiative, doing anything he can to get revenge on the Orcs that killed his friend. It is peculiar how Imperial propaganda insists on portraying virtually any enemy of humanity as a bloodthirsty and oppressive force. Yet Astra Militarum has no problem utilizing primitive, aggressive and vicious brutes like Ogryns. It seems that as long as the monster wants to cause carnage and bloodshed for the Imperial cause, it is not a monster but a rightful servant of the Great Purpose. One might argue that Ogryns, like many other soldiers, inflict violence only for a noble and just cause, but in reality Ogryns, due to their simple minds, barely understand Imperial propaganda and have about the same idea of Imperium as an average cultist of Tzeentch's sorcery. And if the level of Ogryn consent to serve the Imperium can be debated, the same question can be asked about mutants or psychers that basically use the very warp energy that is being blamed for so much evil in the galaxy.